Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome into the Alabama Recruiting Show. I'm Hannah Chalker alongside our Crimson Tide recruiting reporter, Chris Kirshner. Thanks for joining us on this wonderful Monday evening. Chris, it's been 5 days since National Signing Day. I cannot believe time is just flying. And now that the dust has settled, what do you think about the class?
Yeah, I mean, I do consider the class a success. I mean, obviously, Alabama didn't end up finishing #1 in the recruiting rankings, first time in 7 years. I know some fans on Twitter were freaking out about, is this the end of Nick Saban's recruiting dynasty, and will Alabama ever get back on top of the recruiting rankings once again? And I do think that Alabama will have a much better class as far as recruiting rankings go in this 2019 class, just because, as we'll get to later on in the show, several factors were outside of Nick Saban's control, but Alabama did finish 7th in the 2018 class as far as recruiting rankings go. Met its needs at defensive back, especially. Got some quality defensive linemen: Christian Barmore, Stephon Wynn. They got a running back in Jerome Ford, who I think is going to be a very good player down the road. So I mean, Alabama definitely hit on some guys, and they did miss on several other guys, where we'll talk about later on. But I do consider this class a success at the end of the day.
I've heard so many people say this is the end of the dynasty at Alabama. This is the end of the Nick Saban era. Why is everybody saying that off the heels of a national championship?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't understand it. I actually put out a story, I believe on Thursday, after National Signing Day, about just where Alabama is as far as recruiting goes. And, Alabama, had to replace so many assistant coaches throughout this past signing class. They had to replace a bunch of assistants in the previous signing class. So, I mean, that definitely hurts Alabama, because these recruits are building relationships, and if those coaches decide to go elsewhere, these recruits don't have the relationships that they had with the previous staff. And at the end of the day, that definitely affected Alabama with a lot of recruiting targets. So I don't think the recruiting dynasty is dead. I believe Alabama will have either the top class in the 2019 class or one of the top 3 classes come National Signing Day next February.
All right, we're going to talk about just that. We've got a really good show coming up for you today. We're going to talk about Alabama wins, Alabama losses on National Signing Day, and we're going to look ahead to the 2019 class and where the Tide stands. And of course, we want to hear from you guys. I already see some questions and comments rolling in, and Joe Parker says they're just streamers. Oh man, American flag. Let's not get any politics in this. This is the Alabama Recruiting Show. That's Chris Kirshner. I'm Hannah Chalker. Really good show coming up for you today. Let's talk about quarterbacks, though. We know that Alabama did not sign a quarterback so far in the 2018 class, but that's not stopping Nick Saban. He's never done recruiting. The man recruits nonstop. And we've got a new name that has popped up recently this week, and I want to get your thoughts on this and where this guy comes from. He's an East Carolina graduate transfer quarterback in Gardner Minshew. Where does this name come from?
Yeah, he left East Carolina in late January, decided to transfer from East Carolina because of a family issue. I spoke to Minshew last night. He wouldn't get into the specifics about his family issue. He just decided that leaving East Carolina, which is about 12 hours away from his home in Brandon, Mississippi, was just too far away. So he had to come home immediately. So yeah, that's where he comes from. He sent out a release to schools in the state of Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Tennessee, as well as Arkansas. So the the states that are bordering Mississippi in where he lives right now. So he decided that East Carolina wasn't the best fit for him. He sent out his release to those schools in the states that I just mentioned. Alabama was the first school to reach out to him, and as we are today, it seems like he's going to be a part of Alabama's signing class. So he's a graduate transfer. He'll likely be placed on scholarship and count against the 2018 class, because Alabama did not sign a full class, so they still have some spots to use, which Nick Saban hinted at this past Wednesday when he was wrapping up Alabama's signing class. So as of now, I expect him to be that quarterback in this class. He told me that he has 1 year left of eligibility. He could redshirt a year as well. He graduated from East Carolina early. He had a 4.0 coming out of high school, very very, very good student, so he'll help Alabama there as well. He was a team captain for East Carolina this past year, so I definitely think that he could be a good addition to Alabama's quarterback room.
And you had the chance to catch up with Gardner Minshew recently. When did you talk to him?
Last night.
Awesome. We've got that audio for you, so let's see what Gardner Minshew has to say about Alabama.
Well, last week I had to withdraw from school to come home and deal with a family matter in Mississippi. So I withdrew from school. And then when I did that, I sent my release out to every school in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Arkansas, just to find somewhere closer to home, closer to my family that I could play. And then after I did that, Alabama was one of the first to hit me up. And, from there we've been talking. They've been telling me their situation, just building relationships. The deal where I come in the summer, and, just go from there.
With you being a graduate transfer quarterback, one would think that the depth chart at Alabama wouldn't be appealing to a graduate transfer quarterback. So what do you think about their situation?
As far as getting on the field right away, it's going to be a grind. They told me, I can come in and compete. That's all I asked for. But I know where I'm coming in at. They got two really, really, really good young guys. Right. I can't say enough about, the leadership and maturity. I just hope to bring in, work ethic, leadership, experience to the team, and, just help out in that room any way I can.
So you wouldn't mind competing alongside, three young quarterbacks?
Yeah, no doubt.
What has Coach Enos told you about the kind of offense that he wants to run? Because obviously he's only been there a few weeks now. So what is he looking for in his quarterback?
A big factor about his decision making, and that's one thing we talked about a lot. One thing he's liked in my film. So that's one of the keys, and being a leader, being a good guy on the team. All things that I feel like I could come in and do well at.
If Alabama did land you, what kind of person would they be getting?
Oh man, just a driven, hard-working guy that's had to fight for everything I've got. I started as a walk-on from Maryland JUCO, won a national championship there, made it to D1, graduated early. Graduated in 2.5 years from coming out of high school, really. And just driven, goal-oriented, a guy that, just wants to win at all costs. And that's really me in a nutshell.
Awesome stuff with Gardner, and great interview, Chris. Where does he fit in, and why is a graduate transfer seriously considering Alabama, considering the depth there at the position?
Yeah, as he said, he had to transfer from East Carolina because of a family issue. Brandon, Mississippi, which is where he lives right now with his parents, is about 2.5 hours away from Tuscaloosa, so it's not that far of a drive for him and his family to travel back and forth from. So that's the biggest reason why he is very interested in Alabama. He's completely aware of Alabama's depth chart at quarterback: Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones, who didn't play this past season. It's going to be a redshirt freshman. So 3 very young quarterbacks, 3 talented quarterbacks. So why would a guy like him, who has limited time left in college, choose a school like Alabama? Well, like I said, it's because that it's very close to home. He's just looking for the opportunity to compete, maybe win a national championship ring. That will definitely sweeten the deal for him if he did choose Alabama. So he's not looking to get into Tuscaloosa like a lot of graduate transfer quarterbacks do and be the guy right away. He just wants to compete and see where it leads him. But I still believe that heading into next season, Tua Tagovailoa will be the starting quarterback.
Mike Muniz in the comment section brings up a good point. He says, it's a cycle. Bama is loaded in the 5 stars of 2018, don't want to ride the bench, so they signed elsewhere like Georgia did. Is that the case? And do you see him at Alabama?
Yeah, I do think when he visits, he hasn't set a date just yet as to when he'll actually visit Tuscaloosa, but when he does, I do expect Alabama to land Gardner Minshew. But as far as the cycle of Alabama has a loaded depth chart, we have to remember that Alabama has signed did sign the nation's #1 recruiting class for 7 straight years. So Alabama's had a loaded depth chart ever since these kids were in elementary school. It's no different. It's just a matter of whether or not these kids want to wait their turn and possibly, it may take a year or two to get on the field. But as we saw this past class, a lot of kids decided that they didn't want to sit the bench. They wanted to go somewhere else where there were, open depth charts and a better chance to play as soon as possible. And sometimes at Alabama, depending on where the Tide stand as far as position groups go, that's likely not going to happen. So we did see a lot of targets go elsewhere this past year, but I do think this 2019 class will be better at the end of the day.
Awesome. We'll look for an answer from him sometime soon. What's a timeline on something like that?
He doesn't have a timeline just yet.
Okay, cool. Well, that's some good news for Alabama. We've got some more good news and we've got some bad news. But let's start with the good news and taking a look back at last Wednesday, National Signing Day. Alabama picked up 5 guys, and we'll give you a look at all of those names. What are your final thoughts on the class? And Patrick Surtain Jr. was huge to hang on with the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, that was definitely a big win for Alabama. LSU was his leader for several years, and to get a guy like Patrick Surtain Jr., who could definitely start right away in Tuscaloosa, just a gigantic win for the Crimson Tide. I believe that when Alabama faces Louisville, that first game of the season, Patrick Surtain will be one of those guys that sees the field in that game right away. He's just that good. And to stab the knife a little in LSU's side, because I know LSU was definitely expecting to land him. It just makes that commitment just much better for Alabama. And as you see on the screen right there, Jalen Waddle, a 4-star wide receiver, arguably one of the most electrifying wide receivers in the country. He's definitely a guy. Alabama definitely has a young depth chart at wide receiver. Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy, they were all freshmen this past season, and those are the guys that are likely going to see the field for the Crimson Tide this year as starters. But Waddle's definitely a guy, just an electric athlete, definitely can help in the punt return game. I know some people I've talked to have compared him to Christian Kirk, who's at Texas A&M. Kirk, definitely one of the most explosive wide receivers in college football. So I expect Jalen Waddle to see the field as well. Eddie Smith, probably the most underrated cornerback in all of America this past 2018 class. I actually think that Eddie Smith will see the field as a freshman this upcoming season. I know some fans were like, he's a 3-star. When will he ever play? Alabama only gets 4- and 5-star guys, but I do think that he is a little underrated. I believe he was the nation's number 42 cornerback in this class. I do think that when the season rolls around, that Eddie Smith finds his way on the field. And then Michael Parker, 3-star tight end from Huntsville. He's been committed to Alabama. He was committed to Alabama for several months. He was not expected to sign a national letter of intent on National Signing Day, but because Alabama missed on several targets, the space opened up for Parker to be able to sign a letter of intent, which is what he did. He was definitely excited about that. I don't think he's going to play right away. He'll probably redshirt. Tight end is definitely a position that Alabama has a lot of talent at right now. So, maybe in a few years, Michael Parker sees the field, but I don't expect him to see immediate playing time. And then finally, Jalen Moody, kind of an under-the-radar type of player. He was being recruited by several SEC schools in January after not signing during the early signing period. Alabama targeted him because Quay Walker, he ended up flipping to Georgia. Was not expected that he was going to end up signing with Alabama. And then Alabama, the night before National Signing Day, decided to kick rocks with Vernon Jackson as he was considering Texas A&M, which is where he ended up signing. So Jalen Moody, definitely a guy that adds depth to the linebacking group. Just because, as we saw this past season, Alabama had so many injuries at linebacker. So to get a guy like Jalen Moody who could provide depth is key for Alabama.
Chris, those were just the 5 guys that we just saw that signed on National Signing Day. Who's the most important player in the 2018 class?
I would say Savion Smith. He signed with Alabama during the early signing period. Former LSU cornerback. He transferred from LSU to Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College in the summer. He's probably going to be one of Alabama's starting cornerbacks. In my opinion, he's definitely going to be one of Alabama's starting cornerbacks. He's just that good. He was a former 5-star prospect coming out of IMG Academy when he was a high school player. Went to LSU, transferred to Mississippi Gulf Coast for personal reasons. He likely would have been one of LSU's starters this past season, but he decided to go the junior college route. So, in my opinion, I think Savion Smith is easily the most important player that Alabama signed in the 2018 class.
And if you add Patrick Surtain Jr. into the mix, the rivalry with LSU might be a little bit more heated this upcoming season.
Yeah, I would imagine that those guys are going to hear a lot of trash talk from LSU fans in these next few years.
All right, well, it wasn't all good news for Alabama. I was looking for a term to say there, some kind of cute pun, and I couldn't think of anything to say. It wasn't all gravy. How about that?
That's good.
There were some top targets for Alabama that went elsewhere and some surprises. What was the biggest surprise to you?
I wouldn't really say that any of these guys were a surprise. Probably Justin Ross was
Quay Walker didn't surprise you?
No, I mean, I expected Quay Walker to end up at Georgia or Tennessee, and he decided to go to Georgia. He did take an official visit that final weekend to Athens. So he really wasn't a surprise. Probably the biggest surprise, in my opinion, is Justin Ross choosing Clemson. I had heard for over a month that Ross was leaning toward Alabama, but he ultimately decided to choose Clemson, the school that was leading for a lot of the past year. But Alabama did feel confident actually on Wednesday. Ross had given a strong indication to the Alabama staff that he was going to choose Alabama, and he decided to go to Clemson. So I think that was one of the reasons why Nick Saban actually this past Wednesday said he thinks the word commitment really doesn't mean much to these guys anymore. And Ross was definitely one of those guys who told Alabama staff that he was going to choose Alabama, but he ultimately chose Clemson. So I think that was probably the biggest surprise on National Signing Day. Another guy that surprised me was Malik Langham, 4-star defensive end, chose Florida. Alabama was his leader for ever since he got the offer in December. But Florida did a good job of convincing Malik Langham that the only reason why he got the offer from Alabama in December was because Alabama had missed on other defensive line targets already. So he just felt like a second option, and he kind of felt a little slow played by Alabama, a term that a lot of recruiting analysts throw out there as far as guys who may be second options, and Langham was a second option for a lot of his recruitment. So he decided that Florida, even though Florida offered several days after Alabama did, but those are just different circumstances because Florida had a new staff brought in. Dan Mullen's the new coach. As you see there, pretty much the entire staff visited Malik Langham in the Huntsville area. So he definitely felt like a priority there, and now he's off to Gainesville. But the biggest thing for Malik Langham and losing out on a guy like him is that Bobby Brown flipped from Alabama to Texas A&M early on National Signing Day, and that was a huge loss. And then to lose Malik Langham to Florida several hours later, definitely a crushing blow for the Crimson Tide. So
obviously coaching changes had a lot to do with it, but what are some of the other reasons that Alabama missed out on these guys, and how do they avoid this come the 2019 cycle?
Yeah, I do think that the biggest reason why Alabama didn't finish in the top 3 as far as recruiting rankings go is because of all the coaching turnover. I've been covering Alabama since 2015. Guys that have left Tuscaloosa: Kirby Smart, Mel Tucker, Jeremy Pruitt, Derek Ansley, Bo Davis, Billy Napier, Lane Kiffin, Brian Dable, Steve Sarkisian. I mean, so many guys have left Alabama over these past few years. Mario Cristobal, a big one that I forgot to mention. So the coaching turnover that Alabama has suffered these past few years caught up to Alabama in this past cycle. I do think that Alabama did a really good job at hiring these assistant coaches that Nick Saban brought in. Guys like Jeff Banks, Pete Golding, Carl Scott. Those guys are very young. They're kind of unproven, which will definitely help Alabama out on the recruiting trail, because those guys are hungry. They want to make names for themselves. So you can guarantee that this 2019 class will be much better than the 2018 class because of that. The guys that Alabama brought in, Josh Gaddis is another guy from Penn State, very good developer for wide receivers, did a really good job for the Nittany Lions up in Pennsylvania. So these guys are going to be hungry on the recruiting trail. They're going to do a really good job at connecting with these kids, because as I said, recruiting is all about developing relationships, and these guys are going to do a really good job at doing that. But another reason why Alabama kind of struggled throughout the 2018 cycle, the state of Alabama, talent-wise, was really down this year. There are only a handful of guys that Alabama was heavily recruiting throughout the recruiting cycle. That definitely hurt Alabama. The state of Mississippi, especially, there was not one single target in Mississippi in the 2018 cycle that Alabama targeted throughout. That hurt Alabama, because Mississippi is a state that Alabama usually does well in. Louisiana was down this year, another state that Alabama tends to raid as far as top prospects go. There just wasn't that much top-end talent in the state of Louisiana. But as we look ahead into the 2019 class, Mississippi, very loaded. They already have a 5-star prospect in Nakobe Dean, who's very high on the Crimson Tide early. Nathan Pickering, another guy who's high on Alabama early, a 4-star defensive end from the state of Mississippi. Louisiana is much better this year. They have a 5-star defensive tackle, Ishmael Sopser, same high school as Devontae Smith. Those guys are very close. That will definitely bode well for Alabama's chances there. So there are definitely some positives to take as we move forward to the 2019 class. That I do think that when National Signing Day rolls around come 2019, that the 2019 class will be much better than 2018.
I want to dive a little bit deeper into the 2019 class, but first I want to take a few questions and comments. So if you do have one, I have a few saved here, but go ahead and get those in. Jason Hankins asks, other than a quarterback, who else will Bama bring in? We know that Saban has publicly said he's not done recruiting for the 2018 cycle.
Yeah, Nick Saban made it a point to mention that he would like to add another defensive lineman in this class. I don't know of any names right now. A lot of the junior college guys have already signed, so Alabama would probably have to go the graduate transfer route, like a guy like Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Names have not been emerged yet. I haven't been told any names to watch out for in these next few weeks, but Saban did say that he wanted to add another defensive lineman to the 2018 class, and as I mentioned, Bobby Brown flipped to Texas A&M and Malik Langham signed with Florida, two guys that Alabama was hoping to add on National Signing Day. So, in these next few weeks and the months ahead, I do expect Alabama to pursue a graduate transfer defensive lineman, but as to who, we just don't know as of yet.
Trey Wright asks, how different is the defense going to look this upcoming season?
I don't think it's going to really look much different as far as scheme-wise goes, if that's your question. But obviously, Alabama is losing every single starter in the secondary heading into next season. So as far as faces go, that will definitely look different. But as far as who's going to start, we don't know yet, because obviously spring practice hasn't started yet and fall camp clearly isn't here just yet. So there will definitely be some new names on the defensive side of the ball, because Alabama lost every single starter in the secondary.
And Brandon Lee Parrish wants to know, what other positions can Jalen Hurts play if Tua becomes the starter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a question that a lot of Alabama fans are wanting to know, whether or not Jalen Hurts will stay. Will he transfer? Will he switch positions? I don't think he's going to switch positions right away, just because, for one, Nick Saban always has a quarterback competition. So, heading into spring practice and fall camp, I don't expect him to make a position change just yet, because, for one, Nick Saban hasn't said Tua Tagovailoa is going to be the starting quarterback. We can think that he's going to be that, but we just never know what Nick Saban's going to do. So I can't answer that question as of now.
All right, that's Chris Kirshner. I'm Hannah Chalker. You are watching the Alabama Recruiting Show right here on SEC Country. Keep your questions and comments rolling in. We're going to get to a few more of those in just a minute if we have time, so go ahead and get your questions in. But one last thought before we wrap up the show is I want to look ahead to the 2019 class and who are the main targets.
Yeah, currently Alabama has 4 commitments in the 2019 class. Pierce Quick, 5-star offensive lineman from the state of Alabama, definitely going to be one of those guys who is the vocal leader of this class. He's dreamed about playing for Alabama. Yes, he's going to take additional visits elsewhere, but at the end of the day, there's really nothing to worry about there. Quick has wanted to play for Alabama. That's the school he's going to, regardless if he takes official visits or not. King Nakuda, another very important target for Alabama, committed to the Crimson Tide a few months ago. Another guy who is going to be one of those vocal leaders in this 2019 class. As I said, I've started covering recruiting in 2015. He may be one of the most personable guys that I've had a chance to talk to. He's going to be one of those guys that other 2019 commitments are going to want to play with and alongside, so that's going to help Alabama come National Signing Day in 2019. Alabama also has 2 more commitments. Brandon Turnage, he's a 4-star wide receiver. He could play in the secondary as well. His position is still to be determined. And Brendan Gant, a 4-star safety from the state of Florida. Alabama didn't sign a true safety in this 2018 class. I do expect a guy like Josh Jobe, who flipped from Miami to Alabama, to play safety when he gets to Tuscaloosa, but Brendan Gant is a true safety, so that's where Alabama is projecting him as of now. But this 2019 class already, the good news for Alabama, lots of elite guys are already high on the Crimson Tide. I can rattle off some names. 4-star safety Jalen McCullough from the state of Georgia. To get a guy from Georgia to be high on Alabama, definitely good news, because I feel like Kirby Smart's definitely going to do a better job at recruiting the state of Georgia than Mark Richt did. I already mentioned 5-star linebacker Nakobe Dean out of Mississippi, 4-star defensive end Nathan Pickering from the state of Mississippi. Those guys are very high on Alabama. And from the state of Alabama, 5-star center Clay Webb, likely going to choose between Alabama and Auburn. He's very good friends with Pierce Quick, though, and from talking with those guys several times already, it's pretty clear to me that those guys want to play in college alongside each other. So I expect Clay Webb in Alabama's class whenever he makes his decision, which will probably come on National Signing Day. He's told me before that he's unsure of where he wants to go, but it seems like Alabama or Auburn is going to win out at the end of the day. Christian Williams, 4-star cornerback from the Mobile area, another guy Alabama is very high on. Levante Bentley, 4-star linebacker from Jackson-Olin, same school that Connis Miller went to, signed with Auburn. Another guy from the state of Alabama, DJ Dale, 4-star defensive tackle. So the state of Alabama has a lot of elite talent in this 2019 class, and that will definitely help the Crimson Tide in this next class.
Well, Chris, this is our last Alabama recruiting show for quite a while now that National Signing Day has come and gone. What's a name that you haven't mentioned that can keep our Tide fans that are watching now buzzing up until the next time we can bring them more info right here on SEC Country?
Yeah, I mean, 2 guys at the quarterback position in the 2019 class. I know a lot of people have asked about them already. 4-star quarterbacks, Taulia Tagovailoa. You can recognize the last name. Taulia is to his little brother. And then Paul Tyson, a 4-star quarterback from Hewitt-Trussville, teammates with Pierce Quick. Paul Tyson is the great-grandson of Bear Bryant. So 2 quarterbacks who have clear ties to Alabama. Alabama would like to sign 2 quarterbacks in the 2019 class. Those guys appear to be the top targets right now. But as I said, I believe on last week's show, just because those guys have clear ties to Alabama doesn't mean that it's just a slam dunk that Alabama will end up signing those guys, because sometimes kids who have direct ties to Alabama, obviously with Tua being a championship game hero and Bear Bryant being a legendary coach, the expectations that are going to be on Paul Tyson and Taulia Tagovailoa to live up to what their predecessors have done is going to be extreme. So perhaps those guys decide that maybe Alabama is not the place for them and they go elsewhere. But as of now, I do expect them to choose Alabama. So they haven't set commitment dates just yet. They haven't said when they want to make a decision, but those are two names I would say.
One more comment before we get off air here. 3 of the last people that commented, Dre Jordan, Jason Hankins, Stumpy Murray, want to know about the coaches and names of possible D-line coaches, if you know.
Yeah, there are several defensive line coach targets that Alabama has considered. Bo Davis was one of them. He signed with the Detroit Lions the other day. I thought that Bo Davis had a chance to be one of Alabama's top targets on the defensive lines. Just because he's been at Alabama before in 2 previous stints. He does have a show cause, which doesn't allow him to recruit off campus, but because Alabama hired several guys who are very elite recruiters, that wouldn't have been that big of a deal at the end of the day, but he's off the table. Todd Bates is a guy that Alabama fans should know, a former Alabama alum. He's at Clemson right now. Perhaps Alabama reaches out to him. Freddie Roach, another guy with Alabama ties. He's currently at Ole Miss. So those are probably 2 names to watch as far as the defensive line coach opening goes.
Okay, and like I mentioned, this is our last show for a while, so where can our viewers get all of their information? Yeah,
you guys can go to seccountry.com. All of our Alabama recruiting news will be right there, and you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Kirshner.
And you can follow me on Twitter as well at Hannah Chalker. Thanks so much for following along all show, and thanks for watching the Alabama Recruiting Show. We will be back, so look for us in the future talking about everything Crimson Tide. All right, guys, have a wonderful evening and a great week, and we'll see you next time right here on SEC Country.